Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show. Indeed, my name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I am just delighted to be here with you and to share with you our inspirational interviews. My theory is that life can be a little bit tough, sometimes more so than others, both personally and collectively. And I think we're going through a challenging time, in particular the Jewish people. So what I like to do is to introduce to you people who are fascinating, who are interesting, who are compelling in terms of what they've accomplished in life. And today, there is no exception. I am here with my first cousin once removed, whatever that is. And his name is Rav Yoni Rosensweig. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing great. And I'm really, really appreciative that you agreed to do this show. I want to let my listeners and viewers have a sense of who you are. But before I do that, I'd like to mention that the show has possibilities for sponsorship. And if individuals who would like to be part of that, please be in touch with me. My email is at the bottom of the screen, and we can tailor sponsorship or advertising in any way that suits your needs. The show, God willing, will go on for many years, and I think it's an important message that we're giving out. So we need your cash. Succinctly put. Now, let me tell you who my first cousin is once removed. Rav Yoni is a rabbi at the Netzach Menashe community in Beit Shemesh, Israel, and he's a renowned teacher of Halakha, Gemara, and Jewish thought. From 2006 to 2009, he served as Rosh Kollel of the Mizrahi community in Melbourne, Australia. Upon his return, he headed Yeshivat Hamivtar and then became Rosh Yeshiva at Yeshiva Shevut Yisrael in Efrat, a post which he held until 2016. He currently teaches at Midreshet Lindenbaum. Rav Yoni has semikha from Rav Nachum Eliezer Rabinovitch. Is that Zacharenu Livracha?
Yes.
He passed away. And from the Chief Rabbinate of Israel, and degrees in education, philosophy, and in history. He's the author of Yishrei Lev, a 3-volume responsa on different halakhic questions and of conversations in essence. Wonderful, wonderful compilation in which he engages in imaginary dialogue with great Jewish thinkers from the past. I love that. Rabbi Rosensweig is the author of several books, including the recent Nafshi Beshe'elati on Jewish law and mental health, and that will be what we mostly focus on today. But I love the creative approach, Yoni, that you take to your Sforim. Tell us about those dialogues, or one of the dialogues that you had with great Jewish thinkers in the past.
So I think that Jewish philosophy can be sometimes a little bit boring, and any philosophy really. If you like that sort of thing, great. But if you don't, you're not going to pick up a volume of Kant, and start reading through the difficult words and the difficult concepts. And what I really wanted to do in that book was to take the ideas and try to basically mediate them for the general public. So I took, like the idea of faith, for example, and I did 10 conversations just on faith. And I spoke to, different individuals about their perspective. So I talked to Rav Kook, and I spoke to Rav Soloveitchik, and I speak to the Rambam, and et cetera, and each one of them was living at a different time and had to deal with different issues. So when I speak to, Esther, Queen Esther, about the idea of faith in the time that she was and in the situation that she was and what she had to carry with her as she walked into, to the throne of King Achashverosh. I would use my imagination to think, okay, what would she say, right? If I was there, if I could ask her what she felt, right? And that, to be clear, I base a lot of the conversation on actual sources that exist both in the Bible and in terms of the rabbis, but I try to present it in a way that is a story,
So when you would have a discussion with Rav Soloveitchik, Zacharenu Levracha, in your mind, would there be a dialogue back and forth? Would there be a schmooze?
Yes, there would definitely be a schmooze.
Yeah.
Certainly the way I am now. In other words, I would have the guts to have a schmooze. If I was 20 years younger, probably not so much. But yes, I would have questions, and I would have things that I would want to. I would make it difficult a little bit. Wouldn't make it easy to answer. But I would really want to know, how he looks at things, how he sees those things. And I think what I try to show is that, just as an example, what I try to show there, is that faith is a road. In other words, that people don't believe in the same way in different times and in different places, and that faith is not a zero-sum game. Like there's just one way to do it, and that's it. There are different ways, and we have to accommodate those different ways for different people, and that actually kind of leads into also to the work I do with mental health. But we need to try and see, right? For each generation, for each place, what does faith actually mean?
Did you touch upon Rabbi Lamb's book on faith? Fascinating book.
I know what you're talking about, but no, I didn't touch upon it.
Yeah. I've been reading a little bit of it. It's to understand faith in a very deep way. You really have to concentrate on what these great rabbis were talking about, because it's not a simple thing. Yet they also talk about the simplicity of faith, which is an interesting juxtaposition.
Yes, absolutely, and that's part of it, right? Like when I speak to Reb Zusha Vanipoli, who was a great Hasidic Rebbe, right? So faith is something much simpler, much more straightforward. It doesn't have all that labor of philosophy and theology that sometimes when you read someone like the Rambam, like Maimonides, you're like, I don't even understand what he's talking about. Like you read the Guide to the Perplexed, you don't know what's going on, half the time. But you read like the simple teachings of Reb Zusha, and right. it somehow it cuts through all the all the big words and goes straight to your heart. Absolutely.
Speaking about Rav Soloveitchik, your grandfather, Rabbi Baruch Rosensweig, should rest in peace, whom you used to wrestle with on the floor of your apartment in Ra'anana, and you claim that you always won, although he said he did.
100%.
Was that, and he's not alive to debate the issue, but
that's right.
Was that a major influence on you in terms of your development of thought and your loyalty and love for Judaism and halakha?
Absolutely, and it's impossible, of course, to properly know the subconscious effect that a person has on you. But my grandfather was very different than my uncle. My uncle is still alive, is a Rosh Yeshiva, and I grew up in a yeshiva and looked up to my own Rosh Yeshiva. Yeah. And I'm not sure if all your listeners know the difference, but a Rosh Yeshiva is like the head of a university, meaning he's very much involved in the scholastic achievements and the, so to speak, highbrow learning, that exists. But when you walk outside of the gates of Harvard and Yale, or if you will, the equivalent of that from a Jewish perspective, then what you encounter is the world, the world at large. And my grandfather was a man of that world, meaning he was not like unfamiliar with the deeper and more complex Jewish texts, but he was a community rabbi, and he would involve himself with the nitty gritty of everyday life. And there's no doubt that he had a tremendous effect on me in that sense as well, to see the value in that and what can be done, and to understand, that there's a real world and real world problems out there that we rabbis need to take responsibility for.
It's very interesting, the family that we come from, and even the directions that we took personally. But my father was a rabbi in Kitchener, Ontario for 36 years until he passed away in 1989. As we mentioned, you're 80, and my uncle Beryl was a rabbi in New York, and prior to that in Toronto. My cousin, your uncle, Rabbi Michael Rosenzweig, is a Chosheva Rosh Yeshiva and Yeshiva University. There's a whole slew of them out there. And when I go out into the world and I say my last name, they hear, oh yes, I know your uncle, or I knew your father. I knew your dad in Kitchener. Does that happen to you a lot too?
Certainly in America, yes, 100%. But there are quite a few olim here in Israel who know my family, who knew my grandfather, my grandmother, as well. But yes, absolutely. The name Rosenzweig many times is first and foremost interconnected with my grandfather or my uncle. But actually, I think I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but I think here in Israel, actually, they know me. They know me more than they know my American side of the family.
Yeah. So when I posted your picture and your background and the fact that we would be having an interview, there were a lot of responses. I think one individual said you just spoke at his shul or a little while ago in White Pines in the States.
In White Plains, yes. In White
Plains, yes. And yes. My niece, Dina Levenstein, my sister Etty's daughter, said she was very, very intrigued by what you do on Facebook having to do with mental health and halakha. So you're right. You're out there, and a lot of people know your work. So kol hakavod to you. Very well done.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I wanted to dive into your most recent work, which is halakha with Jewish law and mental health. And because most of my listeners and viewers probably don't have an in-depth understanding of either of those, what I would like to do is define them both. So, sure. Yoni, what is halakha?
So I think that for someone who's not so familiar with this, right, it might come as a bit of a surprise. I think Judaism. I don't know all the religions that still exist upon this earth in depth, but it's one of the most punctilious religions out there. It has a lot of laws. Imagine a system of law that exists in any country, in any secular country, and I imagine the equivalent of that, in a religious setting. Meaning, imagine a system of law that basically governs the ins and outs of your entire life. From getting up in the morning to what you'll be doing, to eating, drinking, even sexual relations, even going to the bathroom. Any of these actions have a significant amount of details, of legal details that need to be done in order to, so to speak, serve God, properly. Right, that's basically what halakha is. It's Jewish law. It's a system of law, but it's a pervasive system of law, meaning it really does exist in almost every facet of a person's life. So therefore, you can just imagine that any Orthodox individual following this system encounters these laws on a regular basis, all the time, every day. And if they are dealing with any sort of challenge that might conflict with those laws, then of course the issues are not easy to solve, because a person has that feeling, that loyalty, that fealty to the system of law that he believes comes from God or through God's messengers, so to speak, the rabbis, etc. And he of course wants to keep the halakha, the Jewish law. But on the other hand, if that conflicts with a real life issue, then that will cause a real problem for that person.
Yes,
and I can give many examples.
Yeah, and one example that you indeed did talk about and study was if someone, a bar mitzvah boy, is dyslexic, can he read from the Torah by heart? And I thought that was such an interesting question, right? Just using that sort of as a context. Yoni, what's the philosophy behind the idea, the cumbersome idea to many, of Judaism being so lawful? There are other religions come and say, be a good person, right? Just help other people, be kind, and have that lead you. Why are we so laden in many ways with so many laws?
Right. It's a great question. There's a lot to say in answer to that question, but I'm going to focus on one point, right? Because I'm saying obviously there's a lot of history here, and we can talk about this from a lot of different perspectives about how it came to be this way and whether it's exactly as it should be. But I'm going to put all that aside. I want to talk only about one point, which is that I think that the reason that it became this way, or that it is this way, is because it gives a person a certain sense of stability and of realism in terms of their lives. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Rav Soloveitchik, in his book Halakhic Man, says something beautiful. He talks about how halacha is democratic. So what he means by that is really interesting. He gives an example. For example, on Pesach, on Passover, we all know that we eat matzah. And matzah is a symbol of freedom. Let's put aside how that could be. Doesn't taste that great, etc. So you might say, well, freedom, that's a bit weird. But okay, let's putting that aside. Freedom is a concept. Freedom is an idea. Freedom is a beautiful idea, an idea that people have died for, have discussed, written poems about, written stories about. It's something that is sublime, the idea of being free. And yet, how do we don't need to be great poets on Passover Eve. All we need to do is eat this little piece of matzah, eat that bitter root, eat this, do that, say certain things, and you're done. So you might say, well, that's not really freedom, is it? And the answer is yes and no. What the halakha does, what Jewish law does, is it takes the quality and quantifies it. Now, by doing that, you might say that the quantity pales in comparison to the quality. And there's something to that. But what you've done is you've democratized halakha. Everybody can do it. I don't have to be a great theologian or a great philosopher at the Passover table to understand what freedom is or to speak a bit about it in glowing terms. All I need to do is these few short actions, and I'm done, right? I can do the Passover Seder in 20, 30 minutes, and I'm finished if I really want to. And that's the beauty of it, is that we've taken big concepts, big ideas, this connection to God that we all talk about, and we've managed to quantify it in a way that everybody now has access, so that the rabbi is not like the secret keeper, and he's not, the Jew that we all want to be, or something along those lines. Rather, everybody can do it now. So on the one hand, once again, and this people do complain about sometimes, it becomes monotonous, it becomes a bit lifeless, and there is a sense of that sometimes in Jewish practice. But on the other hand, it is now accessible to all. And what we've done is we've democratized the connection to God. We've made it real. We've made it stable. We've made it accessible. That's the beauty of it.
Okay, so we have a sense of what halakha is. The World Health Organization says that mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes their own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, works productively and fruitfully, and can make a contribution to their community. Mental illness would be the flip side to that. Jump in here and tell me your definition of mental health.
Mental health, in the way that I deal with it, is a sense of equilibrium that a person has in their lives. Most people will say about themselves that they're not extreme. In other words, even when they are part of an extreme group, right? People say, "Oh, you're so extreme." They'll say, "I'm not extreme. I'm middle of the road." You're middle of the road usually in relation to the group that you're with, because people like being middle of the road. That's what they like being. They generally gravitate to the middle. Even people that we view as extreme view themselves as centrist. And it's the same thing with mental health, meaning what do people want? People want to be in the middle. They want to, the Rambam calls it the golden mean, right? The middle road that a person, could have. That's what people want. They want to be able to be, we say normal, right? But what's the word normal? We talk about the bell curve, so people who are on the edges of the bell curve are considered abnormal or not normal. And the bell curve is, the middle is where most people are. That's what people want. So when I say mental health, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who can feel good about their lives, about the way they're living their lives, about their ability to live their lives within the community and in the way that they want to.
So kind of bringing together those two, at first blush, if somebody came to me and they said to me, I'm experiencing mental health issues, and they were halakhic in nature, which means they were devoted to it. They had belief in God, maybe some doubts, but predominantly that was their lifestyle. And they were in some trouble. My initial response would be, okay, do whatever you need to do in order to fix yourself, whatever it happens to be. Eat bacon, if you have to, right? Don't keep Shabbat if that's what you need to do. So you actually said that is something that one has to look at very carefully, because halakha in a person's life is that thing which gives them a sense, their center, really, their balance, sort of, as you were saying before. So when someone comes along to you and they say, Rabbi, listen, you know what? I just can't do this. I'm just having too hard of a time within halakha because of my mental health issues. Your response is, let's figure this out within a halakhic construct. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely accurate. But let me add one point to that. I'll tell you a story, and I'm sorry, it's a bit of a shocking story. It shocked me at the time. A woman called me up, a young woman, and she said to me that she has OCD. And she wanted to know whether she could watch movies on her phone on Shabbos. That was her question. Many times when people ask me questions, they don't explain why they're asking, or like how it connects to the problem that they're having, like what the mechanism here is, so to speak. But I asked her, I said to her, I had a little conversation with her, and I tried to figure out like what's going on. And here's what she told me after I dug a little deeper. She said to me that she uses bleach on her body to clean her body because of the OCD. She uses gallons and gallons of bleach every day.
Nice.
She was using it, and it was causing her burns. So much so that the doctors told her if she continues this way, that she's at death's door, and that she'll be dead in a week. Now, what the doctors had told her was like 2 months before we were talking on the phone. And at that point, she told me she doesn't use as much bleach as she did before, but she was still using a little bit. And she asked me what she can do. And then she said, can I use my phone? So I said to her, absolutely. Of course you must use your phone in order to save yourself. Meaning if that helps to control those thoughts, and if that helps to not use bleach on your body, absolutely. Now, here's the point of the story. After Shabbos, on Monday or Tuesday, she sent me a message saying she couldn't do it. She couldn't use her phone. Meaning she felt that it was a desecration of Shabbos. And to the extent that she felt that she couldn't bring herself to exercise that leniency. So what I'm trying to say is not that that she was wrong or right. That's not the point. The point is that people's religious observance and religious identity is part of who they are. It's a significant part. To throw that away, even for the sake of your mental health, is a difficult thing to do, and something that I'm trying to avoid, not because of some religious fervor, even though, of course, I am definitely committed, religiously, but because that I realize that when people come to me to ask a question, it's not because they don't care about Jewish law. If they didn't care, they won't ask. It's because they care and they want to remain connected. So therefore, my job is to find that very equilibrium I was talking about before, so that they can have both, so that they can also feel connected and part of the Jewish community, the Orthodox community, and at the same time care for their mental health.
I went to Yeshiva myself for 6 years, 5 years in Toronto, 1 year in Israel. And I myself was ensconced in the halachic world, in the frum world. And when I came out of it, I'm no longer religious. One of the things that concerned me greatly was what I believed was sort of like the inherency of OCD within halakha, washing one's hands on a regular basis, right? You talked, I think in one of your writings, you talked about a rabbi told a student, somebody else, that if you don't have kavanah, intent in your davening, keep saying that same line over and over and over. And it could be on a psychological level that's true, but there was so much repetition within Judaism. Do you think there is an inherency of OCD within halakha?
It's a very interesting question, and one that people ask me from time to time.
Yeah.
I'll say this, okay? So I've asked mental health professionals in this field whether there is, just like a greater percentage of OCD amongst Orthodox people. The answer to that is no. As far as I know, the research doesn't show that. Doesn't show that there's more OCD within Orthodoxy. However, what is true to say is that once OCD presents in an Orthodox person, it will many times latch onto his religious activity.
Right.
It will definitely show itself within that, because as you say, religious activity is just like it's fertile ground for OCD, and it's definitely something that the OCD can latch onto easily. So yes, and look, I think that you definitely could say that the way that Judaism is taught certain places does foster that, but like I said, research shows that other societies will foster it other ways, meaning that other ideas or other concepts will foster it in the same way in other communities. That's what I would say.
Rav Yoni, in the world of learning in Torah, it's a very, very interesting world, because I think most rabbis take on a particular specialty at some point. There was discussion in some of my research for this interview about a rabbi who's a real mumcha, has a great understanding of laws pertaining to marriage and weddings. And other individuals will have a great understanding of kinyanim, let's say acquisitions and so on. So you as a rabbi were approached by a number of your different members of the synagogue on such questions dealing with mental health. So you went to the sources. That's what rabbis do. And you found there weren't a lot of sources, right? You said that your nature, it's a very interesting thought, that your nature is that when there's a dearth of information having to do with halakha, you'll go down that road. So my question is, as a halakhic man, and now someone who has a very good understanding of psychology, of mental health, would you be considered an expert within the Jewish world and perhaps outside of it, having to do with mental health and mental illness?
I've been done a lot of these interviews,
Yeah.
and I've been asked a lot of the same questions, but I've never been asked that question.
Yeah.
Like that. That's a new one to me, and it's a complex answer actually, because first of all, you're right. I do like areas that have not been undertaken. I do like looking at those things. I like seeing what the sources may have to say, and I like unearthing, new concepts and new ideas, especially as the world changes, to see how Judaism would react to that, and to see what we do with that. So, that definitely fascinates me. And there are other areas of life that I, eventually I'm interested in looking at as well. But to answer your specific question, I think that I am an expert in a specific, shall we say, substratum of the field. In other words, that I'm not an expert on mental health. I don't have a degree in psychology or social work, and I would never treat a person. That's not my way, right? I wouldn't stick my nose into something that I don't know what I'm doing in. However, I think that when it comes to having that person to helping that person reintegrate into their society, I think I'm a kind of an expert on that. Yes, I think that I've become certainly a resource for both mental health professionals and people with mental health disorders to find a way to reintegrate. Because I always say that's what the halakha is. I'll tell you a little story. People, right when the war broke out here in Israel, almost a year and a half ago, so people right after the war, they started saying, "Oh, you must be so busy." So I would tell people, I'm not busy at all, because what happens is, I'm not a mental health professional. Once again, so is there a lot of trauma going on? Yes, sure. But first of all, post-trauma is kishmo kenhu, meaning it's post-trauma. Yeah, and you have to wait till the trauma finishes. You can't have post-trauma right away. So it's not like that's happened immediately. But more than that, people don't go to the rabbi usually when there's a crisis. In a crisis, people survive. They go into survival mode. When are people interested in the halacha? When the crisis is over and they return to they try to return to their routine and find out that they can't. Find out that things have changed so dramatically that they simply can't continue the way that they were before. So what happens is people come to me and say, look, I want to keep the halacha, but something has shifted. Something has changed. And if you're asking me whether I now see the results of the war, the answer is absolutely. 8-9 months after the beginning of the war, suddenly we got flooded. Now we're getting flooded with calls. We're getting flooded with requests, lots of questions coming up, depression, anxiety, PTSD. Yes, we're getting a lot of that stuff now, because now is when it's coming out. And not just now, for the foreseeable future, we'll see a lot of that. But my main point is that's what I'm an expert on. I'm an expert on helping people reintegrate into their routine, because that's what they need in order to feel stable and to feel alive again and to feel good again, is that they can do that.
So give us an example of reintegration that you've dealt with.
Sure. For example, if a woman, is, once again, all these are cases that happen to me, right? So there was a woman who called me up, a mother, 3 children, married. She wanted to know whether she could listen to music on Shabbos on her phone. That was the question that she asked me. So I said to her, what's your question? She said, regarding Shabbos, I wanted to know because, there are things that I do in the weekday that I can't do on Shabbos to deal with what I'm dealing with. I said, what are you dealing with? She was dealing with anxiety, depression, an eating disorder. She said, during the week when I have damaging thoughts, then I either take a hot shower or I listen to music. And those are 2 things that the halakha does not allow to do on Shabbos. So here's the point. I said to her, out of interest, I said to her, you're calling me now and you're asking me this question, but your conditions didn't start on Monday. Presumably you've been dealing with this for months or years. What have you been doing on Shabbos until now? And what she said to me shocked me. She said to me, well, until now, what I've been doing is I've been using other coping mechanisms. I've either been inducing vomiting or I've been cutting in a non-suicidal fashion. So in other words, there's no vacuum. When a person comes out of, let's say they're hospitalized, and they come out of hospitalization, now they have to deal with their stuff on the day-to-day, right? They develop coping mechanisms to do that. Their coping mechanisms could be healthy or could be unhealthy, right? So this woman developed coping mechanisms for a weekday that were relatively healthy, showers and music, and for Shabbos that was unhealthy. And what that caused was a continual deterioration of her mental health. So we needed to find a way to once again, streamline her care for herself, even during Shabbos, and to find a way for her to be able to be healthy even during Shabbos, or else she can never go back to being at home, taking care of the kids, helping out, et cetera, being a mother, being a wife, So yeah, absolutely. There, right? Once again, I would allow her to use the phone. I might allow her also to take a shower, in those situations, in order to be able to give her the regular coping mechanisms that she uses, and that way she can feel comfortable that she's doing the right thing, both from a Jewish law perspective and also from her mental health perspective.
Yoni, just to retrace my steps for a little bit, because you have semikha, which is accreditation as a rabbi, because you're a learned man, God willing, you become much more learned over the years. Does that make you, in essence, a posek, somebody who could answer such questions and say, yes, you can do this, no, you can't do that? Who is a posek in the halakhic world?
Good question. The Haredi world, the ultra-Orthodox world, has very strict codes with regards to language like this. If I said that I was a posek, they would laugh me out of the room. They have other words for people like me. But yes, in the religious Zionist world, we are less specific about the words we use. And yes, I would say I am a posek. So I deal, look, different rabbis, and I didn't know your father, so I don't know what kind of rabbi he was, but different rabbis specialize in different areas. Some rabbis are gifted speakers, and they speak from the pulpit, and they spellbind the audience, but the halacha is not their thing. It's not their bag. They don't rule. They don't paskin. That's just not their thing. And others are the opposite. They are great halachists, but they're very boring speakers. They don't know how to talk. Et cetera, et cetera. Right. So, and others will discuss Kabbalah, the esoteric world, of Judaism, et cetera, et cetera. I have devoted my life to the study of halacha for the most part. I'm also a community rabbi, but I've devoted my life to the study of Jewish law, and so in that sense, yes, I've devoted most of my time to becoming a posek. That would be correct.
I mean, I think that's a fascinating thing about our Jewish world. Nobody voted you in as a posek, right? I think you went to Rav Asher Weiss with some questions, whom I adore. I watch his shiurim online. Just the fact that he does shiurim online to me fascinates me, right? He's an incredible human being within the structure of he lives and within the world around us. But nobody voted you into being a posek. You rise up into that position, right?
Yep. Yeah, you could. I mean, I think I once heard, I'm not sure if the story is true, but I once heard the people ask for Moshe Feinstein. They asked, how is it that you became such a great posek? He said, someone asked me a question. I gave him an answer. He liked what he heard. So he came back again. And then someone else came and I gave him an answer. They liked also what I said. So they came back. And, so on some level, you're right. It's the people decide. In other words, the people decide who they like, and who they want to come to. And, Baruch Hashem, look, as I said, I don't come from the ultra-Orthodox world. I'm not within the Haredi world, but I get, because of my specific specialty over here, I get many calls from the Haredi world, people who call me with questions, and I'm touched really by the fact that they trust me. It's not so simple, for someone to trust someone like me with a kippah like mine, who doesn't come from their world. It's not a given, at all. But the fact that they've obviously heard good things about me, that people speak well of me in that sense, and that they feel like they'll get like an honest answer that's right for them, for their community, that I won't try to, so to speak, push an agenda on them or anything along those lines. That means a lot to me. That's of great significance. So it's as you say, the people decide who to come to and who to trust, and I work hard to earn that trust.
Is there any fear of messing with other rabbis' turf? You get a call from a Haredi member of that community, and he is part of, or perhaps she is part of, ultra-religious community, and their rabbi is XYZ, and you state your psak, which may be different than their rebbes, than their rabbis. Is that a concern?
Yes and no. So I'll start with the no, and then I'll say the yes. Okay? The no is that a lot of people, if they call, it's also because they can remain anonymous on the phone. They don't want to, with mental health, people don't like to expose themselves. So the chances that they will then relate my response to a rabbi that they actually know is slim in the Haredi world, especially, where things are definitely kept much more secret. So practically speaking, I think people call me with no expectation of comparing notes, with another Rav. But in terms of the yes, I'll just say, right, that I am careful from my perspective. I'm still careful. In other words, even if I think that they will not compare notes, I definitely try to understand from the conversation. And sometimes I ask outright, like what community the person belongs to. And I try to adapt my response to what I think the cultural background and context is, for that individual. So it's important that they know also that I'm respecting, where they're coming from. And I got a call like a week ago from someone. I understood he was Haredi, and I used the right names. I specifically said to them, this Rav says and that Rav says, and I specifically used Haredi Rabbanim because and he was happy. I could tell he was happy that I was using those names. He said, "Oh, really? Those are the people?" I said, "Yes, absolutely. Those are the people." Etc. He says, "Where did you see that?" And I quoted the source, and I told him where I saw it, etc. But it makes a huge difference because, like I said, people are looking for that connection. They're looking to remain religious, but they need it to come from the right people. So the problem here is that I belong to that I belong to a certain kind of community. So people, so to speak, can't trust me. But that's why I emphasize to them, that the source is I'm just a messenger, but the source is someone that they can trust.
It's phenomenal about Israel and to some extent the diaspora is which kippah you wear. You alluded to it a second ago. It's like it's incredible. One of the things I think that caused me great stress in the yeshiva world was that I had to wear a black hat, right? And there's a lot of discussion around the knitted kippah. I'm actually wearing a black kippah for this interview versus the black velvet kippah. Is that sort of tongue-in-cheek or is it very real?
That difference you mean between
the difference.
I think it's real, but I think people are I think it's changing is what I'm trying to say. In other words, I think people do look a little bit beyond the kippah. That's my impression. Although it's still very real. Absolutely. Like, if you wear a certain kind of kippah, then yeah, it'll definitely have an effect. I just I'll tell us it's not such an important story, but I'll tell it anyway. Is that when I was in Melbourne, you mentioned that I was in Melbourne on Shevut for 3 years. So a fellow came up to me, he said, "Why does your Rebbe not wear a hat?" I said, "What?" He said, "When your Rebbe was in Jews College, what today is LSJS in London, when he was in London, principal of Jews College, he wore a hat. Now he's Rosh Shiva in Maladi. He doesn't wear a hat. Why not?" I said, I don't know. He says, "Well, when you're next in Israel, ask him." So I said, "Okay." I said, "Fine." So I went to Israel. When I went to Israel, I felt embarrassed. Even asking the question, but I had promised to ask. So I came out to Rosh Shiva and I asked him a bunch of questions. But one of them, I said to him, someone asked me, I was a bit embarrassed. But your hat. So he said to me, "The answer is simple." I said, "What's the answer?" He said, "Well, in London, everyone wore hats, so I wore a hat. I came to Maladumim, no one was wearing hats, so I don't wear a hat."
Right.
Like some people make it like such a big deal. Your grandfather wore a hat, and then your father wore a hat. So of course, you have to wear a hat. Like it's like some sort of like halakhic principle. But it was much simpler to my Rosh Yeshiva. Like, okay, like what's the big deal? Like you either wear or you don't. No big deal.
Just to sort of draw up on my own experiences, I was always hoping in the yeshiva world, and granted, it was different when I was there, 1973 to 1979, but there was so much emphasis put on the externals. And I was always hoping that somebody, a rabbi, would try to understand my essence, try to understand who the poetic nature of my character and my soul. So the divergence, the differences in that approach were very, very stark and to be very troublesome. And it makes me very happy to know that there's much more of a rainbow approach to Judaism and halakha within the yeshiva world today. I want to discuss halakha. I want to discuss mental health within the Torah itself. Now, there's a classic pasuk in Numbers 11, 14, 15, which reads as follows. This is Moses talking to God. He says, "I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you are going to treat me," this is Moshe Rabbeinu speaking to God. It's an incredible dialogue. "Please go ahead." What does he say? "Please go ahead and kill me if I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin." Was he being suicidal, Yoni?
Was he being suicidal? I mean, look, I'll answer the question. First of all, when I was writing my book and I spoke to Dr. Harris, so I asked him, we read through responsa and they had like descriptions of certain cases. So I said, can you diagnose? Can you diagnose the case? Can you tell me if the guy had schizophrenia or bipolar or something else? And in more than half the cases, he said, absolutely not. There's not enough history. There's not enough to go on, right? People say that King Saul had depression. I understand why they say that, and I understand where they're getting it from. But they're really, no mental health professional worth his salt, would really say that, in a sense, because there's not enough information to go on, not really. And, you're diagnosing from thousands of years away. Was Moshe Rabbeinu suicidal? if you want to, obviously the answer is we don't know. But if you actually want to look at what he's saying, then the answer is no, because if you really want to diagnose it that way, because people talk about active suicide and passive suicide, meaning if someone has a suicidal plan, right? So he's more serious. But if he's just saying I want to die, like a lot of people say that, but they're not really suicidal, and they don't want to die. They don't want to be killed. They're just very, very tired and very, very depressed or distressed by what's going on. But I do want to focus on one last thing, which is that he says, you said it in English, Ha'anochi hariti et ha'am hazeh, Ha'anochi elitihu, says Moshe Rabbeinu. Like, did I give birth to this people?
Yes.
I'm carrying them? Am I their mother? Am I their father? That is a very interesting, to me, that's a very interesting use of language. Meaning, it's not just that he's saying, like, I'm tired, let me die. He's saying, I am being, the responsibility, right, that is being put on me is beyond. Like, you're there. I'm the leader of this people. I know that, but am I their parent? Like, how much responsibility am I supposed to bear? And I think that the modern world has put so much responsibility on people sometimes. Like the amount of things that we're supposed to do, even social networking, like, this idea like, oh, I have 5,000 friends. Who can handle 5,000 friends? Like, it's not, you can't do that. That's actually not a good thing. Like,
right,
it's too much.
Right.
It's too many friends. I think that, we're expected to respond. We're expected to like, we're expected to this, we're expected to that. There's a lot of a lot of responsibility. I think Moshe Rabbeinu is tired of that responsibility. And one last word, if it's okay with you, as I mentioned, it's hard for people to even contemplate not keeping halakha. So I say to people, if you broke your arm, the doctor might put a cast on it, and he would say, don't put any weight on this arm. Don't use it. It has to heal. I say to people, look, sometimes a person's soul, a person's nefesh is the same way. It's broken. And if you put any more weight on it, it'll crash completely. It needs time to heal. So if you put all the weight of the halakha, all the weight of the 613 mitzvahs on this, it'll break, it'll disintegrate, it won't exist anymore. So you need to give it a break. You need it for it to heal, a little bit until you can come back. I think Moshe Rabbeinu, I sense in Moshe Rabbeinu that feeling that he was like, okay, this is the end. In other words, I gotta, it's up to here. In other words, I can't.
Must speak for, yeah.
Right, Hanochi hariti, like I can't carry the weight. Like it's it's too much already. It's just too much, So complaints, fine. But what am I expected to do? I'm expected to feed everybody. I'm expected to. What is this? I don't even know what this is anymore. Like that. That's the feeling that people with mental health challenges many times have, is that they feel like they're in a different world and they don't even know like how they got here. Like what's happening? Why am I going through this? What's supposed to happen next? When is this over? Like when am I getting better? What's the landscape here? Where it's hard to hear, but I do sense something similar in Moshe Rabbeinu's comments there.
So in the case of Jacob's grief for his son Joseph, it was terrible. The Torah actually says he could not be consoled. Job's suffering and despair, Aaron's grief for his sons. Although interestingly, when you take a look at Pshat, it really doesn't talk too much about it at all. Are these mental health issues within the Torah?
So once again, according to, some of them, according to classic, once again, what we know today, right? What we would say today, okay? So for example, with depression, there's actually a differential diagnosis. Like, for example, we don't diagnose depression if someone just lost a parent, because we'll say he's just sad because of that, right? So we'll have to wait to see, right? So with Yaakov, you would say, on the one hand, you would say, okay, he's just grieving. On the other hand, he's been grieving for a long time.
He did.
So if a person is grieving for a long time, maybe that is depression, right? Maybe that would be something that we would say, oh, yeah. With Job, I'm not as sure. Like, it's not, it doesn't say how long he did it, and he was really, like, he went through a lot. So, he was, he was speaking to his friends and talking about his pain, his suffering. there I'm not as convinced that it's something. But yeah, absolutely. I think that we can definitely see the Torah doesn't focus on it, but we can definitely see sparks of what we call today mental disorders in our forefathers.
That within that, you said in another interview that psychology is a bit more difficult to deal with than psychiatry, which is evidence-based, which is scientific in nature. And really it came to the fore around 1980s. And therefore the halakhic world started to deal with it more so, which is positive, which is good. You also talked about the elasticity of halakha, the beauty of it, the elegance of it, the warmth of it, that it allows for a person who is suffering, be it from depression, be it from anxiety, to maneuver. It's not all or nothing. And I want you to talk about that, the elasticity of the halakhic structure.
Absolutely. I think that, those who don't know anything about halakha just don't know. And those who do know sometimes know the wrong side of it. I think that halakha can be looked at as frozen, as I said before, monotonous, even boring sometimes, certainly unfeeling, in terms of some of its language and its demands, and intrusive. So all those things are definitely true. But for someone who knows I don't know how to say it, the neshama, the soul of the halakha, the ways of it, the way that it moves, the way that it flows, and a little bit about the sources, the places, and the places that it thrives from, that it takes from. When you know those places, then you understand the way that it can bend and the way that it can move. So it's like a person, walking through the forest, right? So he might see a huge tree, and he might say, "Look at this tree; it's huge and it's stable and it's not moving anywhere." But someone who actually followed the tree from the beginning, would say, "Look how it's grown! Look how it's changed! Look how it's moved with the land, with the breeze, with the river." You can see the connections that exist between that unmoving huge tree that seems to be like just like a staple of the landscape, and actually the passage of time. So it's the same thing with the halakha. I live and breathe the halakha. So since I live and breathe it, in a sense, from its infancy or from my infancy, so because I do that, I can also understand where, or the many ways, not just where, but the many ways that it can, as you say, be elastic, change, be flexible, and really make way for a person's personality, a person's needs, a person's desires. We have a beautiful line. I'll just give you one example. We have a beautiful line in Masechet Yoma, Tractate Yoma, which talks about Yom Kippur. But there the Gemara is talking about how do we know that we can desecrate Shabbos to save a person's life. Mm-hmm. And the Gemara says, one of the opinions, Chalel alav Shabbat achat kedesha ishmor Shabbatot harbe. You may desecrate one Shabbos for a person to keep many Shabboses. Meaning, you don't find a lot of language like that. A language that basically says that the ends justify the means. Usually that's not true in halakha. Many times the means are the ends. In other words, you have to do what the law says, and whether you understand it or not, and blah, blah, blah. But here, right, the halakha is saying something very central. It says, you may desecrate one Shabbos to keep many Shabboses, meaning we're not looking just at the here and the now. We're looking at the entirety of your religious experience. And we're trying to fix that and make that right. So when I look at a case, that's what I see as well.
Right. Was it an example that was given? I think it was from the Chassam Sofer. Tell me if I'm wrong. About institutionalizing a young man, and there within the institution he would be mechal Shabbat. He would not keep Shabbat. He would not eat kosher. And the Chassam Sofer had to deal with was, you know what? In the long run, if he does go there, or go for a couple of years, whatever it is, he'll come out and he'll be able to be halakhic once again.
Precisely. That's exactly the story there. And it must have been like, the beginning of like these schools for people who were mentally challenged, because, the Chassam Sofer certainly couldn't find a religious environment like that, but he probably sent to the one school that existed at the time. And yes, he does do that calculation, and his conclusion is fascinating, mamash fascinating. It was the first responsa of its kind, so he had to come up with that on his own. But that's exactly what he says. He says we desecrate, not just one Shabbos, but several years even of a person's life. He can live in desecration, in violation, of some pretty, significant laws, such as, kosher meat and things along those lines, but all for the purpose of eventually, producing a mensch, producing someone, who can come, who can, be in society, live in society. And I'll tell you, I once spoke to Rav Mordechai Willig and Rav Hershel Schechter, who are Rabbanim in YU and Yeshiva University, and I asked them, if a modern version of that question, if I have a child who special needs, and I can send him to a religious school that doesn't have such a great program for his special needs, or I can send him to a public school or somewhere, where he's not going to get the best Jewish education, but they have a fantastic program for his mental health needs. So which one should I send to? Mm-hmm. So they said to me, and I remember it was so important this to me, you have to be a mensch before you can be a Jew. You have to be able to carry yourself, to handle yourself in general society on a basic level before you can build on that, to keep all the halakha, to keep the mitzvahs, to serve God, et cetera, et cetera. That's not going to happen. And I see that, by the way, all the time. It's so true. It's not going to happen if you don't have that basic level of being able to handle yourself within society. That comes first.
Are most of the rabbis whom you speak with, refer to, know about your work, are they cool with what you're doing? Or do any of them think you're sort of treading in an area, just leave it alone? Just leave it alone.
I do get asked that question. People sometimes they ask it a different way. They ask me, was there a difference between the Haredi Rabbanim and the modern Orthodox ones? And the answer, I don't know if it's surprising or not, but the answer is no, there was no difference. Meaning all the rabbis that I spoke to, and I see that as a wonderful thing, were sensitive to this issue. Not everyone, some knew more, some knew less, of course, and some understood more, some understood less, but they were all happy to help and understood the importance of the issue and wanted to see how they could make the world a better place. It was really, in that sense, it was heartwarming. Really.
And to help that boy and to help that girl, right? Yeah.
Yep.
You alluded to the idea that halakha has space for the individual, for the character of the person, right? For the soul and the neshama of the person. One example that you gave in your writings was, it's a beautiful example of how halakha helped this woman, or how you helped her. The question of she was Anita, and she was within her menstrual cycle, which meant that she had to be separated from her husband for close to 2 weeks. But she was depressed. She was anxious. She needed a hug. She needed to be held. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so that's, those, of course, are also very intimate questions, meaning between a husband and a wife. And as you say, it's considered to be a very strict issue, the issue of touch during Nida, but a very sore issue when it comes to depression or similar things, because, as you say correctly, many people will need that hug. And to be clear, the hug is not just a hug on an emotional level, it is also on a functional level. It's the difference in her being able to get up out of bed and make dinner for the kids and not being able to. It's something very significant. The person, right, that we count on when we're sick, physically even, right, is our spouse. Yes. Many of us count on our spouse, rely on our spouse to help us out. And here, when a person is suffering mentally, they don't have that ability, when what they need is that hug, what they need is that mental support to get them out, to jumpstart them, et cetera. So yes, absolutely. And by the way, it's one of the most prevalent questions. I get that a lot, that question. Don't think it was just like, oh, once off. It's a very prevalent question. So 100%. What I said there was absolutely that, I'm not going to walk your listeners through all the halakhics of it. but it's not. It is what we call in halakha supportive touch. So supportive touch is different than just like sexual touch, and therefore, because it's supportive touch, we're able to allow it in that context. Absolutely.
What's very compelling about this case and halakha is that within your studies, having this as a question, a very real question from many women and men, I assume, it must really give you a much more in-depth understanding, in this case, of Nida. I mean, the narrative out there about Nida within the frum world is it's beautiful, right? You're separated from your spouse. Therefore, when you come back to your spouse, there's a seductivity to it. And that's a beautiful thought. I've told this to non-frum friends of mine or non-Jewish friends. I go, yeah, I hear that. But there's another side of it too. So it must take you down a very interesting road of understanding Nida and halakha.
Absolutely. This is such an important question because I see it not only with Nida, I see it with a lot of things. On some level, I need to reinvent the wheel. What I mean by that is that these individuals cannot keep the laws the way we all keep them. And because of that, we need to think about what it means to them, right? I'll give you an example from a different thing because it's more prevalent, and then I'll go back to that, meaning people will understand it more. Yom Kippur, right? So if I fast on Yom Kippur, on some level, right, like I said before with Rav Soloveitchik, I don't really have to think about what it means to me because I'm fasting, so I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
When I'm finished fasting and I finished davening, I went to shul, I said everything I needed to say, and I fasted. I did what I needed to do. Great. Now, let's say I have anorexia, and I'm eating on Yom Kippur because I have to eat. So then what does Yom Kippur mean to me? You know what? I actually have to think about it now. I actually have to think about what it means to me because I can't just go through the motions. There are no motions. This is a new kind of day.
All right.
And same thing for people who are keeping Shabbos or not keeping Shabbos, rather. They have to think what Shabbos means to them. And it's the same thing with Nida. Yeah, we have our tropes, that we always push and we say, that's what it is. What is it now? If we don't have that, meaning if we don't just have the law, so what does Nida actually mean to us? What are we supposed to do with this? What is it meant to inspire in us? And, people tell me, and I'm sorry to say this bluntly, people tell me, I hate Shabbos. I hear it from so many people with mental health conditions, so many of them. Once again, I'm sorry for being so blunt. They say, I despise Shabbos. I hate Shabbos. It is the most hated day. I can't be on my phone. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't take care of myself. So we need. So what are our choices? Our choices are to let them hate Shabbos, or to give up on Shabbos, or to transform Shabbos. And that's what we really need to do. That's what I work on, is to try and keep the idea a positive one while taking care of their mental health and caring for their needs and transforming what that idea might mean to a person who's not keeping it fully. And same goes for Nida, and same goes for Yom Kippur and for every other concept.
Yoni, I imagine that through all the calls that you get, you both have the ability to be helpful. As you said in an interview, you said to be makarev. And I don't think you only meant bringing people to Yiddishkeit, makarev them to their own soul, right? Bringing them to their soul. And what a wonderful blessing you have to be able to do that, to have worked toward it and succeeded to this point. But it must be very, very sad as well. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. It is very sad. It's very. There's a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and it gets to me sometimes. I'm not going to tell you I don't. Yes. I don't break down. I don't break down sometimes, and I do cry a little bit. It's very hard. I got a call. I got a call from a mother a month ago, maybe. She asked me. It was half hour before Shabbos. She says to me, I haven't heard from my daughter in a day and a half, and neither have her siblings. And she has had, suicidal ideation in the past. I live in Beit Shemesh. I want to drive to Jerusalem. Can I drive? It's half hour before Shabbos. I say, absolutely. Get in the car and go. And she did. After Shabbos, I called her, and she answered me in a low voice, and she said, I was too late. Her daughter had committed suicide. It's there are days like that. You know what I'm saying? There are days like that. There are times when it's very, very sad. It's very, very hard. People say, what do I do to deal with it? Thank God I have my family. I have people who support me. I have people to talk to. But sometimes
you take breaks.
I take breaks 100%.
Yes.
But it is hard to be constantly exposed to all the troubles and all the distress that exists in the world on a constant basis. Yes, that is difficult. I can just tell you that once in a while, I also get people telling me, hey, Rob, I just wanted to let you know, a year ago, I asked you if to fast on Yom Kippur. You told me not to fast. And this year I'm fasting. I'm doing better. And this year I'm fasting and I'm going to go all the way. And I'm like, great, wonderful. It's nice to hear good news.
So Yoni, with being on the front lines of tourists, if you will, where does God fit in this for you? Where's God in all of this?
That's a good question. People ask me that question all the time, because they also struggle to find God, in their relationships. I think that the things that we hear in yeshiva about tzaddik v'ra lo rasha v'tov lo, about why do good things happen to bad people and vice versa, I think that those answers are good for an air-conditioned classroom.
Nice.
They're not necessarily so good when you're talking to a real person who's actually suffering greatly. It doesn't always work. The regular staple answers don't always work. I think that we need to think deeply about where God is. But look, when people talk to me they say to me, why should I believe in God? If I'm suffering so much, and why did he do this to me and all that? So I say to them, look, I completely understand where you're coming from. But I have a question. I say to them, and if you don't believe in God, are you going to stop suffering? So they say, no, of course not. I'll still have the depression. I'll still have the PTSD. I'll still have the ADHD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I say, okay, so what I think really needs to happen here is not necessarily that you stop believing in God, but that God takes a different place in your life. That he's no longer the source of the suffering, or that the fact that he exists means that you deserve this, and that, somehow, this was meant to happen to you, and that, God is just and everything comes for a reason, and all that stuff that we say, et cetera. I think we're past that. Forget all those lines. Forget all those mantras. I think that God needs to fulfill a different role for you. Maybe a comforting role. Maybe someone to blame. Maybe could be a lot of things, right? I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev or someone else who said, you can be for God, you can be against God, you just can't be without God. Mm-hmm. So, I think that it's okay to be against God. I don't think it's, that's also a relationship. Being mad, being angry. I tell people, I don't expect otherwise, from you. They say to me, how am I going to walk into Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, in this situation? I say, you're right. Reb Levi Yitzchak, there's a famous story about him. He used to do battle with God. So, the famous story about him standing in front of the altar on the bima, the pulpit, on Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre, and he refused to begin. He stood there for 5, 10, 15 minutes, and eventually he opened his mouth and he said, every year we pray to you, and every year you don't accept our prayers. If you refuse to accept our prayers, we refuse to say them, So I think that's also a form of a relationship. And I tell people, look, you can be mad at God. That's okay. You don't have to continue saying, Gamzula Tova, it's all for the best, etc. It's not for the best. You're suffering. You don't deserve this. You're a good person. There's no reason for you to, but that doesn't mean you should be without God. It just means that you have to change what God means to you.
So are you always rock solid in your belief in God?
I've never wavered in my belief, but I think that I've definitely had my my arguments with God, is what I would say, and I'm definitely not always happy with Him. I've never stopped believing in God, but certainly we've disagreed on occasion, is what I would say.
Yoni, since October 7th, I've done a few interviews with families of hostages. Michael Levy is one. His brother Or is in Gaza. His sister-in-law Inav was murdered on October 7th itself. They were very, very trying. Today we got some very good news, I think, that a hostage deal has been signed together with Hamas. And that means that I think 33 hostages will be released starting this Sunday, God willing. Have you dealt with this issue at all directly?
With the hostage situation?
The family, let's say the families of hostages.
A little bit, not a lot. Not a lot. I've mostly dealt with the families of people who have been killed during the war, but not so much with the hostage side of things.
What was that like?
It was very hard. Very, very difficult. The stories are heart-wrenching, and in my own community, 5 or 6 families lost children. So, it was very difficult. One of the hardest things probably that I went through as a community rabbi in my 15 years of being here in Beit Shemesh. I did my best to support, obviously.
It must be so hard to be a rabbi sometimes, eh? Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
Absolutely.
I remember growing up as a kid, and the phone would ring in the middle of the night, Yoni. Somebody passed away in the community. My father would jump up. He'd leave the house. My mother would be awake. We would all be awake. And I saw the trials and tribulations and also the stress that it put on the rabbinical home,
Sure. Absolutely. We do our best for the good of the community.
I want to conclude with a couple of things. One is a prayer for the hostages. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless, preserve, and protect the captives and missing soldiers of the citizens of Israel and the IDF. May God rescue them from captivity and speedily restore them in peace in the merit of the prayers of this holy congregation who pray for them. May the Holy One, blessed be God, show them mercy, increase their strength, remove their pain, and send them a recovery of body and spirit. May God return them to the bosom of their family swiftly and soon. And let us say amen. I've been playing around with AI a little bit. Are you into AI at all? You got to get into it. You got to get into it. It really is the way of the future. So I've asked it many times over the last few months to actually create a poem about my guests. So I have an ode to Rav Yoni Rosensweig. Do you want to hear it? Okay, good. Here's how it goes. And this is AI. In Beit Shemesh, where wisdom flows, a rabbi leads where the Torah grows. Rav Yoni, teacher, sage, and guide, with passion deep, he does not hide. From Melbourne shores, his journey came to spread the light in Torah's name. At Rosh Kollel, his wisdom bright, shining through the darkest night. In halls of learning, his voice resounds. In Gemara's depth, where truth abounds. With halachas clear, his insights vast. The future built upon the past. At Shevut Yisrael, he stood tall. At Rosh Yeshiva, respected by all. With semikha earned, his path was clear. Yet still his heart held those most dear. Philosophy, history, education blend. His studies ever reaching without end. His books, like Yishrei Lev, profound. In them, halakhic wisdom found. Conversations with the past, so wise. In dialogue, he seeks the skies. And in Nafshi Beshe'elati, he shows how Jewish law through healing flows. A mentor, a guide, a source of light. He brings Torah to the darkest night. With mental health and law aligned, in each of us his teachings bind. So here's to Rav Yoni, a soul so true, in Beit Shemesh heart and beyond too. May his wisdom shine as stars above, guiding all with Torah's love. What do you think? It was good, wasn't it? I like AI. Yoni, nice. Pitch your safer so that everybody knows what it is and where to get it.
Thank you so much. Nafshi Beshe'elati, taken out by Koren Publishing. You can go online. You can get it in English and Hebrew. whichever one you prefer. It deals with the halachas of mental health. It's the kind of like the first book of its kind, really, in this regard. And I know that people have bought it also to learn, but also just to keep by their bedside, even if they can't read it, just to know that there's a rabbi who paskin on this, that there is someone who cares about their mental health and their Jewish Orthodox lives. I know that it brings comfort even just from that perspective. So feel free to get it.
Koren Publishing is magnificent, isn't it? Oh,
they're
wonderful.
very good. Yes.
I use their Gemara. It's just beautiful. I want to thank you so much for doing this. I enjoyed it because of the content of what we discussed. There's so much more to schmooze about, but it was also really nice to spend a little bit of time with a cousin.
Absolutely.
Anything for family. Mishpacha, right? And I have to tell you something in terms of the modus operandi. The reason behind my podcast is to give us inspiration, is to give us hope, and so that people understand that there are marvelous things going on in this world. This is such a beautiful path that you've established with your chavrus and with others. And for that, I wish you kol hakavod, and I'm sure my listeners and viewers will really splendor in listening to this interview, because it's not only so full of interesting and thoughtful information, but it's so new and it's so refreshing. It's like finding a new island, So thank you. Yeah, thank you very much to you. You're doing a great job. Ladies and gentlemen, we got some great interviews coming up. Parsha and Prose with Rabbi Shlomo Gemara. I remind you that the rabbi and I, we learn and we teach the Parsha Shavua, and we do it through the guise of classic literature. So you can find many of our podcasts on my page, which is the Avrum Rosensweig page on YouTube and other social media outlets. And until we meet again, take care of your mental health. Watch over those whom you love and your community. And if you can help. And part of that help may be picking up Rav Yoni Rosensweig's book. So, Sei gesund, das Vidanya, until we meet again. Thank you.